So what we're going to do for this is ask to sort of keep the presentation flowing because we have limited time, is to ask for you to submit questions in the chat throughout the presentation as they come up. And then we will have a Q&A time at the end. And Emily and I will, read some of those questions out to David, as well as allow you to unmute and ask questions directly if you wish. So now I'm going to turn it over to my co-host, Emily Schuster-Waksberger with the Children's Trust Fund, and she's going to introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Kara. It's my pleasure today, really, truly, to introduce David Tyler. I am with the Children's Trust Fund in the state of Michigan, and we have 72 councils, local councils across the state of Michigan that are all engaged in educating the community and supporting the community and communicating with the community all about the need for child maltreatment prevention work. And David, I have the pleasure of working with David in the Sanilac Local Council. And they are truly a dedicated group, as David is. He's involved in all kinds of wonderful prevention. We call it primary prevention, really that front end of prevention work that doesn't target that doesn't target specific people, but really is about the whole population and educating them. And David has been involved in wonderful endeavors, including organizing a community baby shower where they're going to educate parents and caregivers of infants about safe sleep and what to do instead of shaking your baby, and all kinds of great infant safety and parenting skills. He's also quite involved with teaching the children of Sanilac County about how to protect themselves and create safe boundaries so that they won't be abused in sexually or in other ways. Truly Sanilac County is on the forefront of these prevention efforts. In fact, just as I'm going to do a pivot here a little bit, they actually have a public, now the word is floating from my mind, but they actually passed a millage, that's it, where their community supports prevention of child maltreatment, and it was built into this millage. David is part of that team, and without any further ado, it is my total pleasure and honor to introduce David.
Good morning, everyone. And Emily and Kara, thank you so much. I'm going to switch to speaker view before I share my screen, right, Kara? Okay. Share screen, PowerPoint, share.
Now, David, I was just going to say to folks too, if they want to just see sort of your face along with your slides in speaker view, if you go up in the top right of your screen, you'll have the view button, and you can change that to side-by-side speaker. So you could just sort of see David and the slides.
Oh,
if that's folks' preference. I just want to make that available to them.
Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. First and foremost, it's a Friday morning, but I love that you're all here. So you may notice the title of my presentation is The Impact of Substance Misuse and Substance Use Disorders on Families. My hope is that today, after having this presentation, it will get us to think in a different way about substance misuse in families. I started looking into the data regarding this, and I really was surprised as I started to talk to some of my colleagues in the prevention world that we tend to focus only on the person who's in treatment. And that sparked a mindset for me that, okay, we need to think about the whole family unit. So I'm going to spend some time talking a little bit about that today. Before we get started, I actually have a video that I'd like to share with all of you, kind of highlighting the 2009 study, Monitoring the Future, that has information that I think is pretty critical to see where we stand right now. And it's only a 3-minute short little video, so give me just a sec to pull that up. Can you see the screen with the teen drug use?
Not yet. Nope. We still see your slides.
Oh, okie dokie. Okay. New share. Click. Share. Is that better?
Yep. Now we see it.
Okay, I'll go back to my so the reason that I wanted to share that video with you, oops, hold on, I'm sorry. There we go. My apologies. I'm not the tech guru I pretend to be. So let me go back to here. I need to share my screen again. I want to share PowerPoint share.
There you go. Now it's up.
And the reason that I wanted to share that video is because substance misuse is really still a huge problem in America. We haven't magically made it go away. But what we're seeing now is that it influences the way that American families operate. That video that I showed you, that was just targeted to teens. We haven't started asking elementary students. We haven't started asking elementary teachers. We haven't started asking parents groups, those questions of are they being affected by substance use in a way that is meaningful for them. I can tell you just from the resiliency work I'm doing in our elementary schools up here, almost every time I say, have you seen mom or dad smoke something or drink something and act goofy? Almost always the hands go up. It in every grade. When I read a story about a certain topic, I see hands go up. So it really has got me thinking we've got to start thinking about the whole family unit. So it affects different, the effects of substance misuse are different in each type of family environment. We know this, whether you're living alone or with a partner, people may try to compensate for the deficiencies of their substance misusing partner. If you're living with a partner and children, sometimes the issues spill over onto the children. And that can be really disheartening too, because what do we know about risk and supportive factors? If children aren't getting a positive, loving message, it's very hard for them to develop a positive self-image, to have those resiliency skills to buff away some of those substance use messages, and especially the peer pressure. Older adults living with grown children is another family example type mentioned in the survey that I gathered my data from. And in most cases, it says family resources are necessary to take care of an older addicted individual or substance misuse person who's misused substances. In this case, it can lead to elder abuse because of frustration. The family feels frustrated that they have to take care of this person. How dare you inconvenience me? And maybe not even intentionally trying to abuse the person, but the frustration causes that. The other family type that I'd like to mention is about living with a step family. Misusing drugs and alcohol can slow the rate at which families come together. It weakens their stability. I like to call this family strain. You know, mom or dad's so frustrated that they have to deal with little Johnny's junk. Johnny's biological mom's like, well, you know, he's my son. I love him. I want to take care of him. There's family strife there. And then lastly, I would also mention living as a teenager with a family. The well-being of the substance misusing individual can oftentimes be put aside by the family, causing others to feel ignored. And the only way that they can get attention is to create a crisis. They have to do something so big to get the attention back on them. This is oftentimes where you see probation have to get involved, you know, sneaking out to be with friends, you know, drinking little bottles of vanilla extract because you can legally buy that. It has alcohol in it. You might see 15, 16 bottles of that in their room, doing whatever they can to get that attention back on them. The key point that I'm trying to make is no matter the type of family, there's commonalities involved. Generally, people who misuse substances will increasingly isolate themselves from their families. They'll also choose to associate with others who misuse substances, which only reinforces the behavior. So we have to be alert to those factors affecting the family, because if your family isn't supporting you to get away from this lifestyle, and we're not dealing with the whole family, we're setting ourselves up to have pretty much a repeating cycle of abuse. Oops, my apologies again. So substance misuse and family interactions. There's so many ways that substance misuse can affect a family. You're probably all aware of it from your work. And a lot of you are probably nodding your head saying, yes, we have to think about this as a whole family struggle. According to SAMHSA's research, there's several characteristics and patterns of communication among family struggling with misuse. And this data specifically comes from their 2014 study. It is the most current one looking at this particular issue. The first type is inconsistency. Without limits, children can't predict their parents' responses. they don't know, oh, going out at 2 a.m. to smoke at the park with my friends, oh, that's not an okay behavior. Well, if there's no boundaries to have that, how do they know? So inconsistency can create a problem, because children can't predict what they think mom and dad are going to say. Is that right or is that wrong? It creates a sense of confusion in the home. Boundaries are really, really important. Again, something I'm sure you're all very aware of. Boundaries are important for everybody. We want to fight against that conclusion. And that's why I chose that little inconsistent messaging graphic over here, because if you have one parent saying one thing, another parent saying another, and then a grandparent involved saying something in the middle, and then a kid switching homes multiple times because of misuse, or they maybe can't stay with dad because he has an issue with X, Y, and Z, has to go live with mom. All of those transitions also equate to a risk factor, which can cause strife and chaos and confusion in the family unit. The next is parental denial. And this comes really in two forms that I saw from the study. The first is total denial. There's not a problem. Our family unit's fine. Even though they may have visible warning signs, a lot of emotional strife, financial trouble, police often getting involved. And the second is after use escalates. Okay. And notice I'm also not saying after a parent uses, after a child uses. I'm using that word. I'm not applying it to one person. I'm trying to apply that to the family unit, okay, as a whole. Parents continue to deny the blaming in the second way that parental denial brings itself about, oftentimes after the authorities have been involved, after the child or the parent is on probation. They don't see it as an issue, even though clearly there's something going on in the family structure. And oftentimes it shifts to blaming the authorities themselves. Well, the probation officers, why this is happening. Oh, the police. Oh, the government. Oh, my kid's got to go to this counseling at the health department. And they're the ones making all these rules up. The next type of communication is unrealistic expectations. This one struck me too because of the self-fulfilling prophecy. If a child is constantly, or a parent or a family is constantly hearing negative messages, the mood is often downcast in the home. Those things are gonna play out. It's gonna be a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you don't have anybody giving you a loving and supporting message, how in the world can you break that cycle? And they're gonna develop relationships that aren't healthy. They're gonna find ways to cope, oftentimes using substances, to get them through that. This is also where some mental health issues can continue to develop too, because if you're not feeling like your self-worth is anything important to anybody, or your self-image is anything important to anybody, boy, it puts your self-value and your self-esteem in the toilet. Low expectations are one of the things too that I would mention in this. If there's low family expectations, it's really something to watch out for, because again, it goes back to that self-fulfilling prophecy, oh, your mom doesn't go to work anyway, she's too busy getting drunk. Oh, Bobby, you're never going to do anything anyway. All of those kind of messages, they don't build positive self-esteem. So if we can help families engage in positive self-talk, which is kind of coaching them not to use that language. I know it sounds hard to say, like, please don't talk like that in front of your children. But if we can help them with that, they have to develop, and families have to develop, meaningful, healthy relationships, especially with the children to the adults. They have to be the ones to build up the self-confidence, the self-image, the self-worth. Some people have never experienced that. I'm finding that out in my work. I have people who have been like, my parents never put an A+ paper on the fridge and praised me for that. And that's something that I remember from my childhood, my parents taking the time to say, wow, I'm so proud of you for working on that paper, you know, or if I won something. And we have to kind of help in that regard. Otherwise, it's going to be self-fulfilling, that it's going to be a negative cycle. Negativity is the other communication that the study really kind of focused on. And notice the picture up there that I put. See the two assumingly parents in the background talking, and the kid kind of holding his head with a kind of a downcast. It's almost as if he's being ignored in that situation. It goes back to that idea that he's going to create a crisis to get some attention. He's going to cry out to do something. Any behavior is an unmet need. Any behavior. Think about when a baby cries. A baby doesn't cry for no reason. There's something that that baby needs or wants, right? The only way to get attention when they do that is to create a crisis. So inadvertently, we're reinforcing substance use. Because if mom and dad don't pay attention to the son, well, I've got to do whatever I can do to get attention. Again, something that this study talks about quite a bit is the idea that experimentation often leads, experimentation with drug use, is often out of, I'm trying to get some attention. I'm trying to get someone to notice me. Whether it be friends at school, parents, a student getting suspended from school, however you choose to play that out. Misguided emotions are one thing that I was kind of taken back when I originally started looking at the data on this, because I never thought of them as an outlet, using substances in the family unit affecting the outlet to deal with emotions. And then it hit me like, duh, David, you studied this. Think about this for a minute. Think about it rationally. If people are using substances to deal with emotions like anxiety, stress, deprivation of emotion, like there's no one saying I love you or giving you a hug in your home, that can definitely cause problems in the home. And if substances are the way that they're dealing with that as an outlet, we have to address that. But again, it's not only the person using the substance, it's the child, it's the grandma, it's whoever's in that home. We have to work with them. And that's why I'm trying to shift the focus from, we tend to only treat the person who is coming in for substance misuse, right? We have to work with the whole family unit, however we can do that. And as you all are aware, there is no exact reason. You know, there's no book you can pick up and say, okay, you're age 14 and you did this. This is why you're using drugs. There's no book that has that answer. It's different for each person. You're probably all very familiar with the self-medication concept. When people are struggling with mental health issues, they're going to find ways to get that pain gone. It's what they're doing, because our mind is wired to repeat experiences that give us pleasure, right? That's the basis of our whole mind. The best way to begin rebuilding family relationships and dealing with mental health issues is really to treat the people who need it and involve the whole family. When we start talking about the mental health crisis, in my opinion, is really a behavioral health crisis, is really a humanity crisis. It's all built together. We have to involve the family. When I have kids come in to see me through the probation office, I try to encourage the family to be involved at some point, whether it's talking to them or the first time I'm meeting with them, so I can share some positive coaching or hear their take on it, and have people be involved to see like, oh, I didn't realize you felt that way about me doing this. And sometimes hearing those words together, it helps. I can't say that it's always been a positive experience. Sometimes I have heard well, I'm the adult, this is the way it's going to be. Or I've heard the kids say, well, you do it too. And, I can't say that it's always positive, but for the majority of it has been. And we want to work to help people reduce mental health crises. That's why I love the mental health first aid. If any of you haven't had that training, I highly recommend it. I think it's really important. We have a couple school districts up here who are actually implementing it in their school for teens, because what do we know about shutdowns? If kids aren't in school and their safe adult is all of a sudden gone, or their outside entity, whether it's not a child or maybe it's a wife or it's a husband who's dealing with a situation that's not intentionally a great situation, you take away that ability for somebody to say, I've got bad things going on in my home. I need some help. Or I've got a secret and I'm not really supposed to talk about that secret because I'll get in trouble. So they're going to find ways to deal with that. With children, you're going to find that they're going to do things to act out. Older adults, they're going to drink or do something that takes that pain away. If you're being beaten every night, you're definitely going to find some way to deal with that if you can't talk to someone. Which is kind of the transition into this slide. So one of the things in the data that I pulled out that really stuck with me was research indicated that on days of heavy substance use, physical violence is roughly 11 times more likely within abusive relationships. Also, more than 20% of male perpetrators reported using alcohol or illicit drugs before the most recent and severe acts of violence. That's massive. That statistic, I just was floored by that. And again, it goes back to that idea of if we're only treating the perpetrator, what are we doing for that mom? What are we doing for those kids who may have heard that, seen that, know about that, are going to form this idea that love is hitting someone, love is beating someone up? We don't want that message sent to them. We've got to work with them to unprogram that so they can learn positive and loving relationships. There's much debate about whether substance misuse causes violence and emotional abuse, or whether the misuse of drugs and alcohol is used as an excuse for the behavior. That is a question that I pulled out from that study because I would like to look at that further to see if that is something frequently that is an excuse. But, I thought it'd be important to know that, and many of you are probably aware of the fact that emotional abuse and physical abuse often accompany substance misuse. But it affects more than the two people. It affects more than one person. It affects the whole family. And we need to be aware of that. This graphic on the side here is one that I keep it in my picture collage because it always reminds me of still think drugs don't hurt anyone but yourself. This photo shows Child Protective Services and DEA agents arresting a mother on possession and distribution charges. That little girl's face breaks my heart. And it's at the heart of what I'm trying to get at is we have to think about the whole family and we have to provide support services for the whole family. And I'm always quoted as saying this to my colleagues, prevention is prevention is prevention. If something happens to a child at 4 years old and it isn't treated, it isn't helped, it isn't dealt with, it's going to cause outcomes later in life. It might be substance misuse, it might be emotional abuse, it might be pursuing relationships that are unhealthy. And again, we know this. The more risk factors someone has in their life, the more likely they are to try substances, to have unhealthy sexual relationships. the most common adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, that were reported in this study were childhood abuse, domestic violence, substance misuse, and parental drug misuse. Individuals who struggle with drug and alcohol misuse actually commented that they forgot to care for their children. They cited examples like, I would go days without cooking dinner. It's possible to some children that they weren't taught proper hygiene, or hygiene wasn't a priority in the home. So you're living in a home where there may not be food available. Keeping your body clean wasn't a priority. Keeping the house clean wasn't a priority. One of the common examples in the data set was if they had pets, like cats, for instance, cleaning the litter box wasn't a priority. So, I have a cat. I can't imagine what it would be like letting Linus poop in his litter box and never clean it. One, that's not fair to that cat, but two, eventually the smell is going to cause some issues in the home. It's not a healthy environment. Drug and alcohol can cause parents to have hard times holding a job, earning money. Well, that directly relates back to caring for your family, right? Because you can't necessarily buy groceries. How are you going to afford litter and food for the cat if you don't have money? It ties back to that piece of it. Let alone the financial support for the kids. If your school doesn't participate in free and reduced lunch, well, then you're going to have a food debt with the school. Electricity, internet access, providing a stable home, all things, again, we know that it kind of can be overlooked. Family members with substance misuse issues may not be physically able or mentally coherent to protect their children. We saw some safety issues come through, and this also comes with the adults in the home too, because there were descriptions of burns from trying to cook. They burnt their hands. Children trying to cook meals and doing so in an unsafe manner. And I advocate for the treatment of all families because I think it's really important. Parenting classes, especially when there's a drug conviction involved or drugs in the home, I've been trying to really encourage our local prosecutor to get a parenting class involved. They need some skills. They might need to learn what is appropriate discipline and what isn't. They might need to learn that, hey, is your home a safe environment? What does that mean to have a safe environment? And if they've never had that, they have no frame of reference to what that is, and substance misuse has just been the pattern, they might need to unlearn some of that. So the second video I have here is from one of my favorite sorry, I'm trying to make sure I click the right thing here. One of my favorite groups, it's called Parents Present. Can you all see that? Okay, I'm gonna make it full screen. This group does a wonderful job of talking about topics that may be difficult to understand. I pulled this one just because it's a good example to kind of bridge that gap. It's a great resource if you need to kind of reinforce some skills.
Okay, we got to talk about drugs. Drugs are here to stay. Sad though it is, they're here and we have to deal with it with our children. What you say to your kids, I'm happy to tell you, does make a difference. With younger kids, it's really not necessary that you get into drugs, hardcore stuff, but it is important that when you give your child medication or when he sees you taking medication, you point out that this is the medication that the doctor gave to me to take. Only I take this. And this is the medication I am giving to you. Nobody else takes your medication. With our older kids, the kids who are 8, 9, 10 through teens, that just say no thing that you were raised on, yeah, that doesn't work anymore. We don't do that. So no to just say no. Rather, you do have to have a more careful explanation that's an ongoing conversation. It's great when you can take advantage of all of our famous people and athletes who are going south, taking drugs, doing things that they shouldn't be doing, steroids and whatnot, and show them, explaining to your child how doing so ruined the person's life. Look at Lance Armstrong, for example. They need to know how it affects your body. They need to know how it affects your brain functioning, that you do not have control over what you do and what you say, and that in retrospect, you may end up doing something that you will regret terribly. Talking about prescribed medications and hardcore drugs is a conversation that has to be ongoing. Hopefully you have open communication with your child and you're not too judgmental in discussing it so that he will come to you and talk about it. But for goodness sakes, let's not start the conversation by saying drugs will kill you, because in fact, that's not necessarily true. Good luck with this one.
Kira and Emily, do you want to do the poll right now?
Sure. So I will release our CEU poll. And David, while they're doing that, can you maybe pop in the chat the links to those 2 videos?
Sure, I have them
Well-
also in the, yep, I'll do that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Doo-doo-doo. Uh-oh.
I see the numbers are still growing, so I'm going to wait another maybe 30 seconds or so for the last few to do their poll.
We're almost there.
We are.
I just posted one of the videos. I'm getting the other.
Great. Thank you.
Yep, no problem.
Figured it was a perfect time since folks were asking for those to have you do that while we had this little downtime. Okay, last 5 seconds before I close the poll.
Oh, I love one of the comments. That's a powerful picture, but it's exploitive of the girls. That's a great comment. Holy moly.
So I've ended the poll. For those that wanted to know, or there were a few that weren't on the same scale as everybody else, but the correct answer is Kellogg's. So, okay, I'm gonna.
90% got that
Mhm.
right.
Yeah, there were just a few.
Yeah, some people figured it was Wheaties or Cheerios, which are Cheerios, I believe, is General Mills.
I think so too.
Yeah, maybe Wheaties too, I'm not sure.
So thank you, David, for popping those videos in the chat. So folks, the videos that David showed, the first one and the second one are both, he put the links in the chat. So you're more than welcome to pop those out and save them for your own bookmarks. Okay, David, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, I'm gonna go back to my presentation. Slideshow from current slide. Okay, so we talked about that, and I love that saying, say no to just say no. All of our data has shown that just say no doesn't work. It just doesn't work. We need to arm them with good information. Family units, youth, kids, we just need to arm them with good information. Adverse environments can be detrimental to a child's overall health. Children and teens who grow up with continual fears and substance misuse problems, they're going to have their mental health compromised. Again, it goes back to the more risk factors they have, the less supportive factors they have, the more problems and problem outcomes they're going to have, which it can affect their schooling, their self-confidence, their self-development, and their future. We know those things are linked. So I wouldn't be a prevention educator if I didn't talk about the genetics and the chronic effects of substance misuse. It's very important. This graphic down here really does a good job of talking about the way that drugs and substances affect the brain. Your brain is the most complex organ in the human body, right? 3-pronged organ, sits in your skull, and it's not done developing until the mid to late 20s. So that's why those the ACEs, excuse me, that's why we need to be cognizant of that. And we need to be cognizant of the family environment, because we know brains aren't done developing until the mid to late 20s. Your brain is you. Your brain is your frame of reference. Your brain is what you take in. It's responsible for interpreting all of the senses that you take in. That's why when we talk about the central nervous system and substances affecting the central nervous system, like those that depress it or those that stimulate it, the brain is constantly affected by them. Anybody who says that a substance doesn't affect their body, I don't know what to tell you, but I drink coffee every morning. I have black coffee. It has caffeine in it. If I don't have coffee, I go into withdrawal. I will get a headache. I will sweat. My stomach will get upset. I use that as an example when I go in and teach, because I am a regular user of caffeine. Now, I might be using it in a responsible manner, but it definitely affects my body. So I wanted to share that as an example. Where substance misuse comes in is when it gets compulsive. It tricks the brain into changing the neurotransmitters, those chemical messengers, like dopamine, for instance, which is responsible for that feeling of, oh yeah, that was great. And when the brain gets tricked and starts overwhelming that reward circuit, it takes more and 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 more of something to get the same result you initially had. Which that's why most people who start out on painkillers for having like a dental operation or a surgery or something like that, for something seemingly perfectly legal, that's why we had to crack down on prescriptions for that, because they were becoming addicted. But then all of a sudden we started to see a shift to heroin, fentanyl, other drugs that were a little easier to get, frankly. I mean, heroin is much easier to get, believe it or not. Up by us, black tar heroin is out on the streets. Meth is making a huge comeback up here, which is unfortunate. Marijuana, again, something that's readily available. Most youth, when they start experimenting with the drug that is within easiest reach. So if the parents smoke in the home, guess what? Cigarettes are going to be one of the first things that they try. I'll share an experience from my youth. I know that my first drink of alcohol was from my parents' own liquor cabinet. I mean, and that was right within reach. So, please don't judge me for that, by the way. So traditionally, when we start to think of these substance misuse, we think of it as a voluntary thing, a series of bad choices. We don't tend to think about it as a disease. And the reason that I talk about it with the brain is because drugs change the brain. That affects the body. And it's a disease. And recent studies have shown that repeated chronic use of substances lead to long-term lasting changes in the brain, which undermine voluntary control. And that's why treatment is so important, and of the whole family unit. Because just like it said in the previous slide, you may not be responsible or remember or able to control what you're doing. So if you're upset and ranting through the house and raving and throwing stuff around and you're on a substance, you're affecting your whole family unit, but it's a disease that's causing that. And we have to treat everybody affected by that disease. So what do? We have to find a way to treat the entire family. We want to build up supportive factors that outweigh the risk factors. We want to have more supportive factors. So in the substance use community, one of the things that our office tries to do is we link to other resources in the area. And that can be through giving them a list of resources and say, hey, you know, you're struggling with this. We think this might be a good resource. A lot of times I see some of the kids that are related to some of the people going through drug treatment, their parents, et cetera, et cetera. And we try to touch on that together. And it's important. We have to find ways to live life without alcohol and the drugs. We have to find a therapy and that works for every recovery process, which is different for everybody. There's not a, B, C, D, E, F, G for recovery. It's unique for each individual as the use is individualized. Families will be more prepared to deal with the impacts of the recovery process if they're all involved, including detox, treatment, and aftercare. Aftercare is really important because they may have a setback. You know, someone in the family that's dealing with the substance misuse may have a setback. We have to prepare the family for that. What could that look like? How can we help them? We need to be more aware of, help the family be more aware of their own needs and how to talk about them. How to say, you know, are you feeling like you're getting enough attention? I love you. Making sure we're sharing those positive messages. By doing this, by treating the whole family unit, the next generation is less likely to develop a substance use disorder because the supportive factors are there. In cases where parents have lost custody of children, they'll be better able to overcome the addiction and reconnect with their family. That's where parenting classes really come into. Most of the time, courts in our state will recommend a parenting class, and it's important. I know that anger management groups are also another one that's recommended pretty routinely. It's essential that you find the right mix. You got to have the right counselor to help with the matter. It's even more important to be upfront about why you want to involve the whole family. A lot of times people will be like, well, this is my issue. I'm here to treat me. Well, your family is just as affected as you are. Generally, family therapists and counselors don't screen for substance abuse as much. And substance misuse counselors, they need proper training. Most counselors will recognize that. If they don't work routinely with substance misuse, they should be honest about it, in my hope. We want to find a professional who's focused on substance misuse, and that may be at a formal treatment center. You know, the person affected may need to go away for a little while to focus on themselves. But that family unit that's left home, they still need some help. Because what's that going to look like when dad or grandpa or so-and-so comes back to that family unit? How does he fit? How does she fit? How do the children fit in that piece? So I really want to thank all of you for listening to me. I appreciate it. I hope you learned something. This slide here has links, and I'll be happy to put these in the chat box. It has links to where I pulled the study and the data. Some of the ones that I would really point out, and hopefully you can see my mouse moving. Substance Misuse and Mental Health Services Administration, that's a fantastic survey, great data there. National Institute on Drug Abuse, I dislike that word, but that's what the title is. The Nationwide Trends, that's a really good one. The National Institute on Drug Misuse, Drug Use Hurts Kids, again, fantastic one to read because it really dives into those ripple effects that keep moving out from the substance use, which is really at the heart of the message. Is it's not just about the person who's in treatment for substance misuse. It's a broader piece of the pie. I'd like to also thank Region 10 in the Sanilac County Health Department for kind of giving me the blessing to be able to go ahead and present. So they're people who encourage that. This is my contact information. I will also make this available to you if you have any questions or anything. feel free to reach out to me. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now and kind of move to some questions.
And I just want to give you one update, David. So you talked about the youth mental health for first aid training. And so folks, I put that link to the youth mental health first aid training in the chat. And when you go to that website, there's an option to select, like type in your zip code and find trainings nearby. And then also just a reminder that you can download these slides from the download section. So you'll be able to have the links that David had presented. So if you haven't got the slides yet, make sure maybe when you leave and you go back to the main event website, you can grab those slides. And then Emily, I'll pop over to you for any questions that popped in first, and then we'll open up the lines for in-person questions.
Well, thank you, Kara and David. Wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, really good. One comment, which could be interpreted as a question, I suppose, is I have to imagine that use and misuse has increased dramatically during COVID. Do you have any information about that?
I do. I've been kind of keeping track with a couple of prevention networks that I'm involved in. We know that it's going up. Unfortunately, vaping is seeing an increase. Cigarette smoking is seeing an increase. Marijuana, heroin, meth. Because if the kids are in virtual school or the family's in virtual school and they're left home and the substances aren't locked up, they're using it. I actually had one father turn his own son in for smoking some of his cigarettes. And when we reached back out to have the conversation with dad, he was not pleased with the fact that his son was on probation after calling. And we had to work with him a little bit to talk about, well, it's not just your son who played a part in this, right? Like family was involved too. And there was some frustration, and it wasn't just cigarettes, it was marijuana as well. But it was left out. It was on the kitchen counter. And so when I was working with the young man, he was like, if it was such a big deal, why wasn't it locked up? Like, it's out on the counter. It's there. And I can understand his frustration. But then talking to dad about it, he's like, it's my house. I pay the bills. I should be able to leave whatever I want out on the counter. Well, we had to have a good conversation about there's some boundaries there. And in order for it to be legal, it has to be locked up. Just like all medications should be locked up.
Thank you. We got another question. How do you make the boundaries work if the children are teenagers and the parents are working outside the home more and cannot keep an eye on them the way they'd like to?
Oh, yeah, that really comes back to having those supportive factors there for sure. Normally, I would encourage latchkey programs or after school programs. But in our current COVID world, some of those are gone away. And it's hard. One of the suggestions that I gave to one of the families I work with is to see if there's a family member who'd be willing to have them be there with them or check in for some accountability. Like, hey, you said you were going to work on your math today on your Chromebook. I'm going to come over at 2:00 to check on your progress, or I'm going to be there today. And I always encourage that people do that, not as a nagging entity, but like hey, I'm going to come over and have lunch with you, and tell that person, focus on the lunch and the conversation and work that in, because if the youth, parents, kids, whoever see it as a nagging entity, they're less likely to be honest with you. And it can oftentimes backfire, unfortunately, but I hope that helps.
All right, thank you, David. And I had one question too, and you kind of alluded to it in a couple of the slides, but can you speak to more about the impact of not only a child being the overachiever as one of the outcomes that can happen in a substance misuse or a family struggling with addiction, but also the impact on the child. And you also alluded to it with the child cooking on his or her, its own, their own. But also the idea of lost childhood, that the child actually takes on the responsibility of the parent, and the impact that has on the child and the family when a child actually parents the parent.
That's a really good question. Okay, so we know that children develop best through dramatic play and having childhood experiences, right? Well, if you begin to take those pieces away, and full disclosure, I was an elementary school teacher. Kindergarten and third grade were my grades. If we take those experiences away from them, are they ever going to get the chance to use their imagination? Are they going to put themselves in harm's way, like having an accident cooking dinner? Are they going to develop normal, loving relationships if they're constantly the one that has to control things, has to make sure mom and dad's okay? It takes a piece of the child away. And so I always encourage that they need time to play. And sometimes we have to teach children how to play again. When they're taken out of that environment, we have to spend time teaching them how to play and how to enjoy themselves and understand that little Billy or Bobby or Susie, you don't have to do that. Your job's to go to school, brush your teeth, have a good breakfast, go play with your friends, because it's important. It's really, really important. One of the things that I would also say is that this is where natural reading can come in too, to reinforce some of those things. There's a lot of stories about resiliency out there that you can buy. And if you are working to rebuild that child's sense of who they are, sitting down with them and reading a story about resiliency is really, really important. One, reading to a child is fantastic. Two, it's bonding time. And three, you can send a message through a book that can help you bring up a topic in conversation that may be difficult to bring up. I use it in schools when I go in and read to elementary school, and it jumpstarts conversations in ways that I never thought possible. So did I answer your question, Emily? I hope it's kind of.
Yeah, it's a complex question because it runs into emotional, taking on the emotional, the daily chores. I mean, all kinds of things. But yes, David, that was a great explanation and great start. It's a great start to a much larger conversation.
Looks like we have. Oh, go ahead. I was just to say we have a couple minutes, so somebody wanted to ask any final questions. So go ahead, David.
Somebody put in, what are my go-to books for starting those conversations? I love the classic books, Berenstain Bears, but all I did to find my books was go to Amazon and I typed in resiliency books for children. One of my favorite books to read when kids are having a struggling day is Why Am I So Grumpy?
Like I got it.
Which you just happen to have right there.
I also like Critters Cry Too, to talk about feelings and emotion, and it's okay to have feelings, but what we do, how we react, how we respond to our feelings, we own that. That's us, that's a good message there. I also have one about a bear who doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, all of those kind of things. Stinky Steve books are really good to talk about marijuana for kids who have parents who may smoke that, because believe me, it's becoming more common. It talks about the idea that mom or dad may have that and in their home. And what does that mean? I see mom and dad smoking something and they say it's their medicine. I also ordered a little skunk puppet that I can take with me when I talk about that, because believe me, it's not going anywhere. So I love that you asked the question about those books. I found that that's the best way to get conversations going with the littler ones, because I want to expand that. Botvin's Life Skills is coming out with a kindergarten and first grade series to kind of help with that. I love that curriculum for the middle school and high school. I'm glad to see they're coming out with some elementary curriculums. So yeah.
And David, I see, well, that Monique raised their hand. So Monique, if you want to unmute.
Yes. I want to ask a question because you touched on the traumas. As a person in the community, so you don't get triggered because you might have some triggers as well. When you're dealing with families, how do you suppress your triggers if somebody is coming to you, like say for instance with this part about the the cannabis situation or something like that, and somebody and that's a trigger for you, how do you push that down and still be able to help someone through that process?
Uh, First off, hi Monique, thanks for asking the
Hi.
question. Um, whew, uh, that's a really good question. What works best for me is I keep something in my hand, whether it's a piece of paper or something that I can hold and move. Whether I'm writing notes or I also have a stuffed Snoopy in my office because I love Snoopy that I can use as like a peripheral focus to kind of guide me through that. And then later in the day, usually when I go home, I have to release that somehow. That's really, really important that anybody who works in health and human services, if you've taken on a lot of stress, you have to release it somehow. I take a shower and listen to music. I also will listen to music in between clients. I have something called Happy Station on Pandora to help my energy and my flow. Because if you're working with someone and they're crying, they're frustrated, I take that on sometimes, and I can't say that I haven't ever been a little touched by that. I mean, but when I go home and I take a shower, sometimes I'll let those tears out, and it's okay to feel things. We just have to be aware that it is affecting us. My supervisor is really okay with mental breaks too, which is important. Taking the time to get away and also, like I said, listen to music that's happy. It's important. Find something that you can do to let that out. But as simple as holding onto a pencil and moving it, it helps. My mentor in grad school, she kept Play-Doh on her desk, and she would fiddle with Play-Doh while she was working with people because it kept her enough that she could listen, but she could squeeze the Play-Doh and move it. And a lot of times she would use it with a client. She'd be like, here, you want a piece of Play-Doh? So I hope those suggestions help, Monique.
Thank you.
David, I know it's 12:04 and we're really getting into the lunch hour here. There was a couple quick questions that are coming in. What age do you, really quickly, what age do you start the skunk puppet and then the puppet? And then also, what was that curriculum again, the name of it? It's there. I see the Botvin. So what age do you start the skunk?
So far, I've read it to first grade, second grade, third grade. This book was one of the first ones, What Are You So Grumpy About? Talking a little bit about emotional intelligence. I took that in and read that to kindergarten, first, second, third, and fourth in a school. And then I recorded a digital version. But the digital version, the file is huge. So I got to find a way to scale that down to be able to send out. The idea came from a teacher friend of mine who wanted me to read to her class for March's Reading Month. She wanted me to come in once a week to read with them. And it was fantastic. The kids were like, oh, yeah, and sometimes I took pencils and things with me. So I would say the conversation is start it young. As long as the school's on board with it. They have copies of all the books that I read. I've only had one school make a comment and say, no, we really don't want you touching on marijuana. Stay away from that. And that's okay. So.
Great. Thank you, David. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. As a reminder, don't forget to get the resources out of the download section. And then just a reminder, we are now breaking for lunch and we'll resume back at 1 o'clock for the next set of breakout sessions. So have a good lunch and we'll see you back here at 1.
Thank you, everybody. Great to see you.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Oh, Leslie, good point. No, I've never tried putting it on YouTube, but that's a good idea.
That's what we do for some of ours is we put them on YouTube when they're too big to email, and you can lock them and say like you have access for the next 3 months, or you can just remove it off that YouTube page. So something to look at.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you, Leslie.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Leslie. Bye-bye, everybody. See you at 1 o'clock.
Thank you, David. Have a good one, everyone.
You too.
Great job, David.
Oh,
Bye.
thank you.
Nice job.